The darkness of the hall is not empty, it breathes. You are lying in the absolute blackness of Heorot, the great stag hall of the Danes, waiting for a demon who has eaten 30 men in a single night. There is no armor on your chest, there is no sword in your hand. You have stripped yourself of every piece of steel that might offer comfort. All you have is the rhythm of your own pulse and the cold, paved floor beneath your back. This is the moment where the legend holds its breath. Not where you fight for glory, but where you find out if a man's naked will is strong enough to strangle a nightmare. Long before this night, the name Beowulf was a rumor whispered across the Whale Road. He was the Geatish warrior who had ground enemies into the salt of the sea and battered giants into silence. But reputation is a ghost. It cannot bleed. Here, in the land of the Danes, the stories of his swimming matches and battles meant nothing against the reality of the curse. The local thanes looked at him with a mix of desperate hope and cynical pity. They knew that legends often come to die in the dark. Heorot was meant to be the wonder of the world. King Hrothgar built it to be a beacon of light, a place where gold was given and songs were sung. But for 12 winters, it has been a tomb. The Hall of the Heart stood abandoned after sunset, its magnificent mead benches collecting dust instead of warriors. The laughter that once rang from the rafters had been choked out by fear. The building itself seemed to mourn, its timber ribs aching for the warmth of the hearth that had gone cold. Hrothgar, the war king who once commanded armies, sat old and joyless. He had seen his friends and kinsmen swept away, their blood staining the floorboards he had commissioned with such pride. He wept not just for the dead, but for the impotence of his reign. The Shadow Stalker had made a mockery of his sovereignty, proving that walls and guards were useless against a creature that walked out of the mist and into the center of their nightmares. When Beowulf looked upon the king's sorrow, he saw the pattern of failure. The Danes had struck at the beast with the finest steel. They had hacked and slashed, but the blades had bounced off the monster's hide like reeds against stone. Beowulf understood the grim arithmetic. If the monster was immune to weapons, then a weapon was a liability. It was a crutch that would fail you when you needed it most. To rely on a sword was to plan for defeat. And so the plan was formed. It was madness to some, a suicide pact with pride. But to Beowulf, it was the only way to balance the scales. He would strip away the safety of the shield. He would face the creature skin to skin, grip to grip. He would not hide behind metal, he would become it. This was not merely a tactical decision, it was a theological one. If God was to judge this fight, he would judge the man, not the smith who forged his blade. The sun died in the west, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The shadows stretched long across the mead benches, touching the feet of the Geats. The feast was over. The queen, Wealhtheow, had passed the cup, her eyes lingering on Beowulf with a silent plea. Then Hrothgar and his court departed. The heavy doors closed behind them, leaving the Geats alone in the echoing vastness. The transition was stark, from the noise of the living to the silence of the waiting dead. Beowulf stood in the center of the hall, the last light fading from the high windows. He began the ritual. He unclasped his mail shirt, the heavy rings chiming like funeral bells as they hit the floor. He unbuckled his sword belt, handing the weapon, an heirloom of his people, to a steward. He removed his helmet, exposing his neck. He stood there, a man made of flesh and bone, offering himself to the dark. He spoke into the gloom, his voice low but cutting through the silence like a chisel. It was the butte, the formal boast that bound a warrior to his fate. I count myself no less in battle strength than Grendel does himself. I will not cut him down with a sword, but with the grip of my hands. If he dares to face me without a weapon, then we meet as equals. God must decide who will be given to death. He lay down on the bench, feigning sleep. His men, exhausted and terrified, drifted into a restless slumber, their hands twitching near their hilts. But Beowulf remained awake. He slowed his breathing. He watched the door. He became a part of the hall's architecture, a trap waiting to be sprung. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until the very air seemed to thicken with anticipation. It began with a sound from the moors, a sliding, slithering weight moving through the mist bands. Grendel, the outcast, the corpse maker. He came gliding down from the fen slopes, wrapped in the shroud of the night. He moved with a predatory fluidity, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness. He was hungry, not just for meat, but for the violence of the kill. He reached the hall. The iron-bound door, fastened with fire-forged bands, stood in his way. He touched it, and the hinges snapped like dry twigs. The wood shattered. He stepped onto the paved floor, his presence filling the space with a smell of sour water and old blood. And then, the eyes. From his head, there stood an unlovely light, very much like a flame. It washed over the sleeping Geats, and his heart laughed. He did not hesitate. He moved to the nearest warrior, Hansio, a man rigged out for combat, sleeping the sleep of the doomed. There was no battle. Grendel snatched him up, mauling him on the bench. The sound was wet and terrible. He bit into the bone lappings, the joints snapping. He bolted down the blood in great gulps. He tore the body apart, eating the man hand and foot, erasing him from the world in seconds. As he gorged, a detail emerged from the horror. Hanging at the monster's waist was a strange accoutrement, a roomy pouch, a gloff, stitched together from devilishly fitted dragon skins. It was a bag for leftovers, a tool of mass consumption. He intended to stuff the hall's defenders into it like livestock. It was this industrial efficiency, this treatment of warriors as mere commodities, that fueled the cold rage rising in Beowulf's chest. The demon turned. He reached out a claw, palm open, towards the next man, towards Beowulf. This was the moment the trap sprang. Beowulf did not shrink. He did not roll away. He rose up from the bench and caught the monster's open hand, and he squeezed. The impact was instant. Beowulf clamped down with the strength of 30 men, locking his fingers around the claws. Grendel pulled back, expecting the man to break, but the grip held. Panic, sharp and sudden, flared in the beast's mind. He wanted to flee, to run back to the safety of the dark. Beowulf planted his feet. The wrestling match began. They crashed through the hall. The massive mead benches, bolted to the floor with iron, were torn loose as they thrashed. Gold flew, wood splintered. The hall groaned under the violence of their dance. Then, the sounds changed. The growls of the predator turned into something else. A terrible high wail rose from the throat of the Almighty's enemy. It was a scream of agony and disbelief, a sound that froze the blood of the Danes listening outside the walls. It was the song of defeat. Grendel realized, in the crushing pressure of that hand, that he was mortal. The immunity to weapons meant nothing. The magic skin meant nothing. He was being unmade by force of will. The end was not a stroke of a blade, but a failure of anatomy. Grendel pulled with the desperation of a dying animal, dragging Beowulf across the floor. Beowulf did not let go. The tension focused on the shoulder joint. Sinews split. Bone lappings burst. With a wet, sickening crack that rang through the hall, the arm gave way. It tore free from the shoulder to the claw. Grendel, mortally wounded, shrieked and fled into the night, leaving his limb behind. Silence rushed back into Heorot, heavier than before. Beowulf stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving. He held the gory trophy, the whole of Grendel's arm, the fingers dead and stiff, the claws steel-hard. He walked to the high gables and hung it there. It was a grotesque chandelier of victory, a sign to all who would enter that the reign of the shadow was broken. The dawn brought the Danes racing over the sandy roads to stare at the bloody footprints. They praised Beowulf, comparing him to the heroes of old. But as the warrior stood under the hanging arm, he knew the truth. He had won not because of his strength, but because he was willing to lose everything to bait the trap. And he knew, with the instinct of a man who has looked into the eyes of hell, that the swamp was deep. Grendel was dead, but the mother waited. The war was not over. It had just begun. Like this tale of ancient iron and blood, subscribe to Saga Weaver. Every week, we unearth the legends that forged our world and witness the impossible choices of the warriors of old. Join the host. Subscribe now.